Hey everyone, and welcome. You've definitely seen this in the movies, right? The police raid a building, they seize a bunch of stuff, they freeze bank accounts. But how does that actually work? What are the real deal rules? Well, today we are diving deep into that legal playbook, the step-by-step process that controls how property is searched, seized, and attached. It's all about balancing law enforcement power with individual rights. Let's get right into it. And right from the get-go, the law plants these rules firmly in the 21st century. Get this, Section 105 doesn't just suggest, it mandates that the entire search and seizure has to be recorded. And by specifically saying preferably cell phone, it makes it so clear this isn't about needing some fancy high-tech gear. Nope, it's about using the technology we all have in our pockets to create a clear, objective record. It's a massive tool for transparency and keeping everybody accountable. So here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start with that requirement recording. Then, we'll walk through what happens when police seize property on the spot. After that, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of targeting the proceeds of crime, see how the courts make the final call, find out what happens to all those seized assets, and finally, we'll look at how these rules work across state and even national borders. All right, so let's kick things off at the very beginning, the search itself. Because really, the foundation for any legitimate search and seizure these days is creating a record of what went down that anyone can go back and verify. This rule really has three parts, and they're all super important. First, the recording. It's not optional. You just have to do it. Second, the law is practical. A simple cell phone video is perfectly fine. But it's this third part that's the real game changer for accountability. That recording doesn't just sit in an evidence locker. It has to be sent immediately to a magistrate, which means a judge is looped in from the very start, providing that crucial judicial oversight. Okay, so the camera's rolling. Let's move to the next stage. We're at that moment an officer decides to physically take something. What gives them the authority to do that, and what do they have to do right after? So what gives an officer the right to seize something right then and there? Well, the legal basis, spelled out in Section 106, is all about reasonable suspicion. They can take property if they think it's stolen, or if the situation just feels off. Like finding brand new laptops in the trunk of an abandoned car. It's all about that initial on-the-scene judgment call. And the second something is seized, a very clear protocol kicks in. The officer takes the property. If they're a junior officer, they immediately report up the chain of command. But here's the key part. No matter their rank, a report must go to the local magistrate. This keeps the court involved from moment one. The property is then either held officially or sometimes given to a trusted third party, a custodian, who signs a legal document promising to keep it safe. The law also has some common sense built in. What if the seized property is a truckload of fruit that's about to go bad? Well, if the items are perishable, they're worth less than 500 rupees, and nobody knows who the owner is, the superintendent of police can just order an immediate auction. It's a totally pragmatic way to stop the property from becoming completely worthless. Okay, now we're going to make a pretty big pivot. We're moving from seizing suspicious items at a crime scene to a much more complex process, going after the financial profits of a crime. This is where we really start to follow the money. Now, before we go any further, we have to wrap our heads around this key legal term, proceeds of crime. As Section 107 defines it, this is way more than just a bag of stolen cash. It's any property, we're talking cars, houses, businesses, that was bought with money that came, directly or indirectly, from a crime. It's a really broad definition, and it's designed to stop criminals from just washing their illegal money into assets that look totally legit. And this is where you see a huge shift. This is not some on-the-spot decision by a police officer anymore. Look at these steps. An officer needs approval from a superior just to ask the court. Then the court takes over. It issues what's called a show cause notice, which is basically the court saying, prove to us this property is legitimate. The person gets a chance to respond and have their side heard before any final decision gets made. That right there is due process in action. This brings us squarely into the courtroom. Because the ultimate power to attach someone's assets doesn't lie with the police. It lies with a judge. This section is all about the timelines, the powers, and the checks and balances that are part of that whole judicial decision. 14 days. Remember that number. It's the critical window the law provides. Once you get that show cause notice from the court, you have exactly 2 weeks to get your case together and explain to the judge why your property is legit and shouldn't be touched. And that 14-day window, it has some serious teeth. If a person just doesn't respond or doesn't show up, they lose their chance to argue their side. The court is then allowed to move forward ex parte, which is just a legal way of saying they'll make a decision based only on the evidence one side, in this case the police, has presented. But the law isn't naive. It knows that if you give someone 14 days notice, they might just use that time to hide the assets or transfer them somewhere else. So for those urgent situations, a court can issue an immediate temporary attachment order. It basically freezes the assets first to make sure they're safe, and then the whole show cause process plays out. So the court has made its final decision. The property is officially considered proceeds of crime. This leads to the big question, right? What happens to it all now? Where does it actually go? And this part is so important. The number one goal here is restorative justice. The law is crystal clear. The court's first priority is to use those assets to pay back the victims who were hurt by the original crime. Making them whole comes first. It's only if there aren't any victims or if there's money left over after they've been paid back that the rest goes to the government. And look at the timeline here. Once the court signs off, the district magistrate is officially on the clock. They've got 60 days to get this distribution done. This makes sure that victims aren't just left hanging, waiting forever to get the compensation they deserve. All right, for our final section, we're going to zoom out. As we all know, crime doesn't always stop at state lines or national borders. So how do things like search warrants work when you need to go beyond the court's immediate backyard? Well, the process really depends on where that warrant is headed. If it's within India, a court in one place can simply send the warrant to its counterpart in another territory and they'll execute it. Easy enough. But if you're dealing with a foreign country that has a treaty with India, what's called a contracting state, it gets more formal. The warrant has to go through official government channels to make sure international law is respected. Okay, so let's quickly recap the biggest points from all this. First, transparency is baked into the system now with mandatory video recording. Second, seizing the profits from crime isn't something the police just decide to do. It's a formal court-supervised process. Third, the whole point of asset attachment is to compensate victims first. And finally, there are clear rules of the road for when law enforcement needs to cross state or even international lines. And that brings us to a final question to chew on. We've walked through a process that's filled with safeguards. The video recording, the strict court oversight, the focus on victims. When you think about it, what do you believe is the single most important safeguard in this entire system for making sure justice isn't just done, but is seen to be done? Something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this explainer.